welcome to this masterclass on screenwriting. I'm Ria Hebden. It's my absolute pleasure to be your host today. We have got an absolutely fantastic panel of screenwriters here today to share their stories with you. First up, we have the man behind the Sky hit comedy Brassic, Danny Brocklehurst, the creator, writer, and executive producer of ITVX's Unforgotten, Chris Lang, and stand-up comedian turned writer, whose credits include Idris Elba's In the Long Run, Not Going Out, and Mongrel's Danielle Ward. Welcome. So let's dive straight in, because lots of people here would love to hear all about the fantastic work that you guys have written. Danny, let's start with you. You've adapted various Harlen Coben books. Can you tell us about what the processes are like and where do you start and all of that? Because it's such a big task, isn't it?
It is. You know, the thing about doing the Harlens is, in a lot of cases, you are starting with one of his books, although we have done a couple of originals. But the book doesn't, you know, it's never going to lend itself perfectly to a TV series. So there's always a lot of work to do with Harlen to sort of recraft the book into, you know, an 8-part TV series, add new strands, decide kind of what we keep in, what we change in, and just sort of rebuild it really. But I suppose the good thing about working from Harlen's structure is there's usually a really interesting premise, and there's usually a pretty, you know, well, either satisfying or unsatisfying, depending on how you view it, ending. So you've kind of got both ends of the bridge, really, you know, and then you've got to kind of
bring it together.
Yeah, exactly.
And how much creative freedom do you give yourself?
Loads. I mean, you know, and the good thing about working with someone like Harlen, he's not particularly precious about changing his books. Okay. You know, the book is there, the book exists, people can read the book. This now has to be a TV series, and it's got to have hooks at the end of every 45 minutes, and you know, we have to bring in new characters and sometimes change characters from male to female or female to male or whatever, you know, give people a different backstory, you know.
And what's the timeline on something like this?
Usually quite quick.
Is it really? I imagine it takes ages.
Much quicker. Well, you know, there's never enough time. That's the thing. You know, so yeah, sometimes it can be, you know, you can be storylining very quickly because you've got to get to the writing process. But I think we always kind of build in a bit of time in the middle of the process to stop and pause and reassess. And then we can sort of change the storyline as and when we need if we find that things are not working, you know.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Chris, let's talk to you about Unforgotten, because it's a hugely popular ITV drama. Can you tell us a bit more about how you developed the 2 lead characters, and also how you adapted when you knew that Nicola was leaving the series?
Well, I guess I wanted to write a show a cop show where the cops weren't quirky, odd, with eccentricities and drink or drug problems and an unusual car. I just wanted to write what my experience of most police officers that I'd met through researching other shows which was that they were fairly ordinary. They did an extraordinary job, but they were largely fairly ordinary people. And then when you watch shows like 24 Hours in Police Custody, which was coming out around about the same time as the first series of Unforgotten, that's kind of borne out by that. There's a sort of banality to it and an everyday quality that was very much at odds with how most cop shows, not all, but most, were presented. Quite often there was a lot of design involved in the police stations. There was a degree of artifice in their lives that I felt didn't reflect the reality. So that's what I was trying to do. And then when Nicola left, I really just wanted to take the character, if you like, the new character who came in on the same journey as I knew the audience would be going on, which was a new person coming into something that was quite well loved, the show, and watching the characters all around them resent that person, and so mirror the journey that I think the audience were going on. And I think that actually worked, and I could see it on Twitter, which I am on tragically, and I could see how the audience's relationship with her started off very hostile, and they didn't like her. They thought she was an interloper, both the actress and the character. And I watched that slowly change until they completely took her to their hearts in episode 4. So it did what I wanted it to do.
Fantastic. And Danielle, you come from the comedy side of writing, and you've also worked with Danny on Brassic, haven't you? How did that come about, and how different is writing scripted comedy compared to scripted drama?
Well, Brassic came about, I think I'd written like a spec script, a 60-page spec script about my criminal family in Nottingham. And the only character that was different was the mum. Everybody else is literally based on my own family. And I think my agent sent it over to Calamity Films because they were looking for another writer. And I had, because I got the job just before COVID locked everything down as well, so I hadn't met anybody. I didn't meet Danny till the rap party. Like, we worked on a whole series, 2 series together. And so I had some meetings with Danny, and I had a very funny meeting with Joe Gilgan. I'm not even going to repeat what you said, but it was very funny. Just checking my credentials as being able to write working class characters. And that was great, really. And I've been working on Brassic, so we're coming up for series 6, aren't we? So 4 series I've worked on it now. And it's an amazing job. Obviously, I have to say that. It's a great job. And how, like, I think the difference between writing comedy and writing drama is, I mean, obviously Brassic is a very funny show, so we get to do loads of comedy in it. But I think it's just, a lot of it's just to do with stakes. Like, I don't write comedy or drama. I write things that are half hours, or write things that are hours. Or, like, I have a film that's just going out to finances at the moment, and that's a big, big horror film. But there's still a scene in it that I think is really funny. Okay. So I just write what I want to write and hope that it chimes with, someone, and then I get picked up to either work on a show or get my own thing greenlit.
I love it. And when you're in the creative process, how do you know when your script is ready? When does it feel ready? That's to all of you.
When you finish the ADR, right?
You're always tinkering. You're always tweaking.
I mean, I don't think... it's quite a difficult question to answer for me, that, because I don't think you can ever relax, really, until it's kind of filmed, and even then, you're messing with the edit, I mean, I suppose there's different stages of, I know when I'm happy with a draft, but then inevitably you'll get some more notes from... that you weren't expecting further down the road, annoyingly. Some of which may be good, some not. And then, you're constantly addressing stuff, even to the point where you're just shooting it and maybe you're dealing with things that actors want to deal with, or little things on the day, or the director notes, and it goes on and on and on, really. I mean, I was just looking at something then a few minutes ago, a little line change from the edit on Brassic, can we change this, can we change that? And that's pretty deep into the process.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how do you find that process, Chris?
Yeah, very similar, and certainly a script's never finished until it's on the telly, and even then, you're still going, why did I do that?
Oh, really?
But there's a moment, definitely, and of course it's all about subjective opinion as well, so, what's finished for you is quite often not finished for someone else. But there's definitely a moment when you read a draft and it sings. It has a rhythm and a musicality to it that doesn't make you cringe. And, I revisit my scripts multiple times before I hand them in. And then there's that moment when you read it and you're finding less and less to change. And it's just, there's a rhythm. And I think the best metaphor is there's a musicality to it. And that for me is when I feel, okay, I'm ready to hand this in.
Yeah.
Well, it depends who the script's going to, I think. If it's going to a producer to try and sell on to a broadcaster, it's going to be, you probably do fewer drafts. If it's going to a shooting script, you'll do many more, and you'll be making changes that maybe you don't want to, but you have to, logistically. Yeah. Some actors have got COVID, that sort of thing, writing people in and out. But for me, like, my first draft of something that goes somewhere is never a first draft. And I think sometimes newer writers don't realise that my first draft is normally a 4th or 5th draft. Okay. The first draft is always awful. No one reads that. And then it gets polished up. and then I'll send it out. But it's normally like 4 or 5, and that's just for the first draft.
And how much are you all involved in the overall production once you've written it? So you're there on set making the changes, if you get notes from production, from the director, from the actors, but how much of it are you across everything? Are you in the edit as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't go on set much personally because I find it incredibly boring.
I love that.
Free biscuits, though.
Free biscuits, yeah. I usually go around lunchtime if I'm going to go.
Always.
But I do get involved in everything else, all the casting, the edits, hiring of key roles, all that sort of
The actors.
fun stuff that's very distracting but important,
Well, it's key because they're bringing your work to life,
Yeah,
aren't
of
they?
course.
Yeah, ditto. Right from the very first parts of pre-production, looking at locations, looking at design, obviously casting, and like Danny, I almost never go on set because it is they're all doing their job, and you're walking around like Prince Philip with your arms behind your back, saying, "Well done. How do you remember all the lines?" And that's all you have to contribute, really.
Yeah.
And everyone slightly loathes you. They don't really want you there. I think you make the actors rather nervous. So. Yeah, and then once shooting's finished, and also, by the way, you're watching rushes every day as well, and feeding back on those. And then once it's finished, then you're fully involved in the edit. So yeah.
And how do you deal with the notes and feedback that you get from commissioners?
Well, you can say it.
Some broadcasters different broadcasters have different involvements. The BBC is obviously very heavily involved. I work a lot for ITV, and they have a very light touch, and they give sometimes quite big notes, but they're very simple, and they're usually quite clear and easy to do, and I love that.
Have you got any recommendations to people who maybe are considering pitching scripts to commissioners from what you've learned from your experience, kind of do's and don'ts?
Find out what they want.
And then don't do that.
I think you've just got to write your own thing. Like, it depends what you're trying to do. If you're trying to get like a big procedural away, then obviously, there's a formula there that people really love. But if you're trying to get your own little niche sitcom away, don't try and write something that isn't something that you're quite passionate about. I think you can really tell when someone's tried to write, especially if it's their own script, where someone's tried to write something to tick some boxes rather than what it is that you want to do. Like, there's that whole thing about write what you know, but what it should be is write what you really give a shit about. Just don't write something that you think's dull.
Right, okay, I love that. Chris, can you talk us through some of the writing differences when you're writing something, say, for a factual story, like The Thief, His Wife and The Canoe, as opposed to a fictional story?
Well, there are pros and cons to both. Obviously, with a story like Canoe, you're presented with this extraordinary narrative that if I pitched it, people would have said, that's absurd. That would never have happened.
Yeah.
Yet it did. So I'm given a ready-made story. Obviously, then you have to, impose structure on it that allows it to be told in a coherent way and shapes it in a way that I suppose real life very rarely has that shape. You have legal restraints because you're writing about real people, and in that case, who committed a criminal act, and there were lots of people who were the victims of that. So you have to be aware of their sensibilities, and I hope we did that in that case. So you got lawyers all over it all the time, in a way that you don't with a fictional piece.
Yeah.
But then, obviously, then when you're creating a completely original piece, you have total freedom. You can create whatever you want. So there are pros and cons to both, and I love doing both.
Do you prefer one over the other?
If I got offered stories like The Thief, His Wife and The Canoe every day of the week, then I would do them every day of the week because they're so extraordinary. There's something uniquely powerful about telling a story that actually happened, and I think an audience, well, I mean, it got 10 million viewers, and I think that says something because I think people come to it knowing, my God, these people are out there.
Yeah, it's crazy.
These people who did these things are actually alive.
Yeah.
So I think that is very alluring.
Yeah. And Danny, can you tell us more about the themes that you'll be exploring in £10 Poms? Because this is going to premiere later this year is it on BBC One?
Later this week, in fact.
This week.
Yes.
Congratulations. When can we watch it? What time? What day?
It's on Sunday night on BBC One.
Right.
9
Watching.
o'clock.
Okay. Set your telly. So what kind of themes are you exploring in that?
So it's set in 1956, which is when there's a thing called the assisted migration scheme, when Australia wanted to populate or perish, they said, they described it as. So they kind of advertised in the UK and in a few other places, wanting people to go and live in Australia, and all they had to pay was £10 for the boat over. And you had to commit to going for 2 years. You had to give up your passport. And our story is about some characters who go from the UK and how they fare with this sort of crazy giving your life up and going to the other side of the world thing.
It's so interesting. It's not really been done before either, has it, when you think about it? That's really interesting.
Not that particular
It's an
story,
angle.
no.
Yeah. And so what attracted you to that story initially?
Well, what attracted me was that there was a very old documentary from probably about, I don't know, the 80s, something like that, of people who had done exactly this. You know, a lot of talking heads of people giving their real life experiences. And I watched that and I just thought, there's a drama in this. Not to try and take those real life stories, because as Chris has said, that's a nightmare. But no, just to use it as a sort of canvas for a drama, really, about starting again. There's obviously a kind of, there's a sort of parallel to modern day immigration, although I wouldn't lean on that too heavily, but there is clearly a parallel with going somewhere and not being particularly welcomed, but also themes of escape that I've done in the past, how you can try and start again, but you always kind of have to take yourself with you, really. That's the...
I love it. Okay, well, we'll be watching that Sunday, 9 o'clock,
Yes.
BBC One. Danielle, how's your career progressing, and what are the challenges
Come on, Danielle.
of moving from being an amazing collaborator to a lead writer?
I think my career's going pretty well. It's in an exciting place. I'm shooting my first, so it's just a pilot, so it's comedy. Shooting that next month. It'll be the first time I've created my own thing that's getting made. And that's very exciting. I'm not allowed to talk about it.
I was just going to say, can you tell us a little bit?
I just want to say I'm not allowed, because it's just a pilot.
But it's
not
going to
really allowed to
happen.
talk- Well, I hope so. It's got quite a big cast. That's very exciting. I will be on set for the entire time. I once had a panel show pilot for Channel 4, and I sat in a meeting for 2 hours discussing the height of a table. And it was the worst production meeting I've ever been in. So as long as that doesn't happen on set, I'm fine. So that's what's happening, and I've got this film that's doing the business, and I recently wrote a script for Michael Eisner, which obviously isn't doing anything at the moment because the Writers Guild of America strike. So that's out in the States. So I feel like I'm getting there, but I think there's a degree of being a woman in writing, being a working class woman. I think there's still, if you look at the stats, female writers tend to do adaptations. We're not trusted to come up with our own magical worlds and things. So I think there are still those little avenues that are perhaps hardest. I think, it's getting better. But it's still difficult, and especially if you write comedy, there's still a slight feeling that, if you're writing big comedy, you can't really do that. If you're a woman, you've got to write about mental health issues, none of which I cover in my sitcom.
Yeah, and where's that coming
I don't
from?
think they're great. Those are great shows.
Yeah.
But there is still this idea that if you're not talking about terrible sexual experiences or mental illness, what have you got to bring to the table as a woman?
That's weird, isn't it? That's completely not true, because
Yeah.
you've got a wealth of things you could be writing about.
Yeah.
Okay, and so who are the people that you've got around you that are helping to support you as you become a lead writer? Because we're all enabled, aren't we, by sponsors, mentors? Like, who are the people that are helping you or have helped you in your careers?
I just throw Danny's name around in meetings,
And
and
that
that seems to have worked.
But if it
good.
works, great.
I'm also I'm on the BBC pilot scheme, so I'm moving. That's helping me move from comedy into drama as well, and they've been really good. I'm working with BBC Studios on a big conspiracy theory type drama, and I've had some brilliant help with the plotting. So obviously there's not so much plot in comedy, moving into drama, and that crime procedure, that's been really great. I've had a lot of support there. But I don't know. I think when I first started as a stand-up, there were lots of great comics that helped me, which I think sort of buoys you along a little bit. Moving into writing, because I'm a bit older and I've been in the industry a bit longer, I don't think that's around so much.
Yeah. Well, you're leading the way, and you're certainly overcoming those barriers.
Yeah, I get emails. I get about 2 emails a month from comedy writers going, how do I write drama? Because, there's 3 comedy slots a year.
Yeah.
There's loads of drama. And so sometimes you just want to be writing. You just want to be able to write something. And drama, there's more opportunity.
And are you guys part of any kind of writers' networks or clubs? No? It's just...
Oh, I'm not.
I'm
not been invited in.
I think, it is quite an isolated career. If you like being on your own, which I don't mind, then it's the career for you. Once you get into production, obviously, there's a lot of interaction. I've just done last year. I did a scheme, Screen Skills, which was a mentorship scheme where I was mentoring a younger writer. And listen to what Danielle was saying. I wish there'd been something like that when I was younger, because I was thinking as you were asking that question, well, I never had any kind of mentors. You kind of, you clawed your way up on your own, and it would have been nice to have those connections, and it's something that the industry is lacking. This scheme has been actually incredibly successful. They've done it for 3 years, and out of, 15 projects, about 4 of them have been greenlit, which anyone who works in the industry will know that's insane numbers.
Yeah.
Insanely good numbers. So it obviously pays dividends to have a more experienced writer mentoring a younger one, and there should be more schemes like that.
And so when you were coming up, did you have any mentors or anybody that shared the learning on how to do it, or did you just kind of carve your own path?
I was very fortunate because in Manchester, when I was starting out, there was quite a sort of, quite a healthy creative community. So I got a lot of help of Paul Abbott and Nicola Schindler, and to some degree later Jimmy McGovern. So in a way, I was just fortunate to be coming into the industry at that time with those people, and I sort of made a connection with those people. And to this day, I still work with Nicola Schindler. 20 odd years later. So I guess I was fortunate.
Yeah, I think it definitely feels like sometimes that there's just a scene that kind of bubbles up, and you have these key moments where creatives do really well, and then they kind of fizzle out again for a few more years, and then you get another. But it's how do you pass on that learning and wisdom that you've got from climbing the ladder, passing it down to make it easier for the next generation coming through, especially for women, so they don't have it so hard.
Yeah, there are. Especially when it comes to comedy, you can stand comedy up in front of an audience. Think of the Female Pilots Club that runs in London, just in a small venue. And they take sitcoms written by women, pilot episodes, and they stand them up in front of an audience. And these newer writers get to see the material in front of an audience. And obviously it's a completely different experience from filming it. But knowing that you've got a script that's got some jokes in it that's making an audience laugh can really help you find your voice as a writer. And things like that I think are really good, because I came through the Edinburgh Festival system. I was a stand-up. I did the Edinburgh Festival. I won some comedy awards, and I got TV script commissions off the back of my Fringe shows, which was sometimes stand-up and sometimes more theatre pieces. But the Fringe is about to collapse under its own weight, so there have to be other places for people to, if you want to write comedy, for you to be able to put that in front of an audience without it costing you £15,000-20,000.
Yeah.
And anything like that is as much about validation as it is anything. I think if you can tell a young writer, read their work and go, do you know what, you're good. You can do this, because I think there's something very other about being a writer if you're not in the world, and if you're standing outside, and you can feel it's very hard to say I'm a screenwriter, I'm a writer, and you can have a lot of a lack of faith in your ability to do it. But if someone who's done it and knows what they're talking about says this is good and you're good and you can do this, I think it's really important.
Oh, it's so powerful, isn't it? I mean, it sets you up for success and it keeps you going through the challenging times and certainly the lonely times, like you said.
Yeah.
So what would you say then are your kind of golden rules for screenwriting?
Starting with Danielle.
Starting with Danielle.
Don't be boring. That's it. Well, I mean, we've all been there, right? You're writing a scene and you're like, this is really boring. I am bored writing this. These characters are being boring. I mean, if you're bored, everybody else is going to be as well. So just don't be boring. That's it.
Okay, that's one. We need 5.
That's the only rule.
Oh, it's the only one. Don't be boring.
I've got 3.
Go on, give us 3.
Structure, structure, and structure.
Yeah.
That I think you can. Structure will prop up an awful lot, and I don't think you could write the best characters and the most fizzy dialogue in the world. But if the piece is structurally unsound, they won't fly, they won't live, and you will waste them. So I would argue always start with. Yeah, obviously you start with your idea, but if you don't do lay the groundwork and do the foundations, they'll fail.
Okay, great advice, Danny.
As Chris has gone for structure 3 times, I will put in a vote for dialogue, because I think what, like, for example, what we do on Brassic is every single character has got their own unique voice. You know, you couldn't write, they don't sound like each other. And I think quite often in TV shows, people sound like each other. You could cover up the name and all the dialogue would sound the same, you know, and it's only because different actors play them that they happen to sound different. And I think you've got to try and learn a skill to make your characters have their own voice and like they sound like themselves and not just everybody sounds like you writing it. Yeah. I think that's really important. It took me a while to sort of really get into the rhythm of that, but I think, you know, I think that's an important lesson.
That is a really good one, isn't it? Making sure that your character has a distinctive voice.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to open it up to the audience questions, which I hope you've been submitting on Slido throughout. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Old trick.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's have a look. Oh, only one person shared their name. Put your names in, because I like to give you a shout out. So Paul HD has said, would you use AI to help you with ideas for storylines?
God, no.
No? Why not?
Never in a million years.
Why not?
Because that's not the point.
Thanks, Paul.
Because it's about your own personal experience, what you're writing. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to connect with other people by giving a piece of yourself, a piece of other people you know, and stuff that you've made up yourself. And through that combination, that alchemy, trying to understand something about the human experience. And yeah, I wouldn't.
Danielle, would you be tempted?
No, I mean, like,
AI?
that is part of the joy of being a writer. Like, we had a little Brassic meeting just before Christmas, didn't we? I think I came up with about 8 storylines. I'm only writing 1 episode. So, I mean, I love doing that. Why would I hand that over to AI?
Yeah. Okay. Is that a no, Danny?
I can barely get my printer to work, let alone fucking AI.
Okay, we've got another one. Right, any advice for young people wanting to break into script writing and development? What are the first steps?
Well, God, this is always such a hard question because it's tough.
Do you need an agent?
Yeah, an agent.
That's half the battle, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's getting an agent is hard.
Yes.
But an agent will make it 90% easier.
Okay. Any you recommend?
Oh, I mean, there's lots. But, you know, write every day is what I would say.
Okay.
You know, you become a writer by writing. And even if you're not getting commissioned and you're not earning money, just keep writing. And none of it's wasted. It's all good practice. And hey, I'm still using stuff that I wrote 20 years ago. So, you know, write every day.
I think you've got to finish something as well. Like, I get people saying to me, oh, I wrote the first 15 pages of a thing, you know, and you're like, well, okay, but I think it needs, you know, you've got to have something complete to show people, to show that you can structure and, you know, you can finish the story, and whatever that is, whether it's a half-hour comedy or a movie, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter, but just complete it. Don't just give somebody 10 pages. I don't think that's good enough, really, you know.
Similarly, I think you need that spec, that really good spec that is everything that you want to be as a writer on the page. You have to get that finished. And then ideally, you probably need like a couple of other specs as well. But sometimes I meet new writers who will say, oh, I've got this idea for a script. Can I come and work in a writer's room? It's like, you've got to really show you can do a script first.
Yeah.
That's the first. And it's hard. It's so hard. Writing on spec is incredibly difficult. And getting a half-hour script written is a huge task and you won't be paid for it. But you do that to show you can do it. And then hopefully that's where you get the agent and the work.
And I think something also that younger writers don't necessarily understand is how much mud you have to throw at the wall before you get something away. And I often meet young writers who might have one spec and one idea. You've got to have a slate of your own that's 20, 25 ideas long. Some of those will be a paragraph, some will be one-liners, hopefully 2 or 3 will be actual scripts. But that's the sort of volume of material you've got to start shunting through your career, and those ideas will evolve and change. But you've got to start and just be fecund.
Just create that body of work.
Yeah.
It will all come to use eventually.
Definitely, it's never wasted. It's an investment.
As an actor, you need your show reel, right? And it's really hard to get that. So sometimes you can just get a mate filming you on an iPhone, and you put it together. And the more work you do, the better your show reel is. Well, your pile of specs is your show reel. Without it, you can't get the work.
Yeah, so it's integral. Okay, next one. This is a good one. Kate has said, how do you deal with a creative block?
Well, I don't really like to talk about the creative block because I just sort of fear it as a thing. But I think also what I tend to do is just like not see it as a block. I just see it as like a problem that needs to be solved. And I do a lot of walking around, really, and things like that. If I'm stuck at the computer, I'll just go for a great big walk somewhere and try and just try and work it out in my head. Try and think of it this way, think of it that way, shift it around. Just to unlock it. And sometimes it'll unlock very quickly, and other times it's very stubborn and won't unlock quickly. But yeah, I try not to think of it as a block, just a sort of hurdle.
And also, I mean, I kind of view it as, isn't it not part of the creative process? So just accepting that, and like you said, going for a walk and not letting it become a bigger problem. Yeah.
I mean, look, there's problems in any job, right? I'm sure there's problems. If whatever, I'll just pick a job out of the air. A plumber. I'm sure plumbers sometimes got to work and they can't quite fix something. And they've got to kind of think about it and work out. And maybe consult a manual. It's just the same. It's just the same. You've got to try and work it out.
I think that's really important because I think we've got to stop mystifying the art of screenwriting. It's a craft. It's a job, and like any other job, I don't think you should have the luxury of saying, "Oh, I've got a block." A plumber doesn't say, "Oh, I don't really feel like plumbing today." It just gets there to the desk. In my case, you get to your desk at 8 o'clock and you do the work.
8 o'clock.
Yeah. Well, that's me.
That's impressive.
I wake early, but I write very often very badly. But you go back the next day and you just improve it. Don't allow yourself the luxury of thinking this is something you can walk away from because the muse is not with you.
Absolutely.
It's a job.
Yeah.
And I suppose you have to be resilient doing what you do because it's part of the process and you're accepting that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, sorry, John. Yeah.
Oh no, I mean similarly, yeah. You've got to treat it. Once it becomes a job, it's your job. And I'm a big believer in terrible first drafts. Like I will write literally any old shit to get 60 pages to then go back and refine it. And that's the hardest bit, just writing anything. But you just get it down, and then everything is easier from that point.
Everything is easier after that first that
get
first
it done.
draft.
And how do you figure out what commissioners want? I mean, it's the $100 million question, isn't it?
They want good stuff.
Define good or exceptional.
I mean, it's sort of impossible to answer, really. I don't think anybody knows what commissioners want. Sometimes even commissioners don't know what they want.
No.
I think a lot of good stuff does rise to the top. I mean, sometimes you look at things that get made and you think, well, that wasn't good stuff and it got made. That's baffling. But I guess certain genres are always going to be more popular than others. I don't know. It is. I often think I'd quite like to work as a commissioner just to see behind the curtain, to see what actually goes on. back there.
Be a little fly on the
But then
wall.
maybe not, you know.
Okay, I've got a question here from Charles Marriott. He said, Chris, with Unforgotten, is the budget based on the complete series? So typically, do you have to write within a set budget?
Always you have to write within a budget, yeah. But that would be the same with every single show. It doesn't matter what the budget is. At some point, someone will say, you can't do that, we can't afford it.
Okay.
Always, yeah. The budget goes up, hopefully, a bit each series. But you can never afford to do everything, even when you're making Lord of the Rings.
Even when you're making Lord of the Rings.
60 million an episode, and you can see it on the screen.
Okay, I've got a question here. It's an anonymous one. How important is it to screenwrite to raise awareness and encourage people to take action about social issues? Often people rely on news and documentaries.
Well, it's quite a tricky question, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you can, if you can draw attention to stuff through your writing, then great. Like we do a whole thing about bipolar in Brassic because Joe, wanted that to be a big aspect of Brassic, and it's a pretty filthy-mouthed comedy, but we try and do this quite serious stuff in there that people have really responded to, So that's very gratifying, but it would never be the starting point for me. It would always be something that I felt we could sort of thread in.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, and then final one. Where do you get your ideas for dialogue, and do you have any tips on developing it? That's from Cheryl.
I mean, you have got to listen to people. I think it's really helpful to just listen to how people talk to each other. And sometimes when you write, you're choosing to write in a way that doesn't sound natural, and other times you're trying to find a really natural voice. And I think with dialogue, the more awareness of the world around you have, the better writer you will be, definitely. But I also think, sometimes I'll write a very functional line of dialogue, and I know it's functional because I'm just trying to get to the end of the script. And I always try and go back and refine the dialogue, like what you were saying earlier about characters having different ways of talking. There's a really functional way of writing dialogue that I personally don't like, and I do try and jazz it up a bit because that's my job as a writer. But yeah, listening to people and find it. If you might find someone who's just got a brilliant turn of phrase, and you want to use them as a starting point for a character. It's all that sort of thing, really.
So I've just got visions of you on the train back up north, listening to people's conversations for tips for your dialogue.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Scripts.
Or headphones on. Yeah, but you've got to be aware of. I think sometimes as a writer, because it's such a solitary job, and you spend so many hours by yourself, you sort of forget that your job is to invent people.
Yeah.
So the more time you spend with people, the better.
Want to add to that, Chris?
Yeah, I think, when you're for me, character is about a third yourself, a third invented, and a third people you know. And so there's a little bit of you goes into everyone. And then a combination of the others. And dialogue, again, you just keep rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it until it sounds like how people speak.
Just finessing. Let me see if I've got time for one more. Oh, about the strike, you touched on that. Will the WGA strike have an impact on screenwriting in the UK, do we think?
Well, I mean, not directly, but our industries are interconnected, and we all sort of work for streaming services now, and I think there are writers' rooms, and I've certainly done stuff in America, so I think there's a lot of crisscross between the two industries. Chris?
Yeah, well, everything's come to a total halt over there, and that has started to sort of filter over here, and I mean, I don't know too much. I've never worked in America and not had a massive desire to, so I don't know too much about how it works, but from what I'm reading on Twitter, it sounds awful.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a strike is very, very overdue. I don't know what it's like to be a a totally young writer either here and come into. We don't have such a tradition of writers' rooms, but I think it is more of a thing than it was 10 years ago, maybe. So I hope that we don't adopt any of the practices that they have out there, because they sound dreadful to me.
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to say. It's the streamers, like in terms of a direct impact, it will be how the streamers respond to it. But I mean, we have a different set of rules with the Writers Guild of Great Britain. So and also America are trying to stop happening over there what happens over here.
Yeah.
So we're not going to slide backwards because of whatever happens in America. They'll just be lowering their standards to meet ours. So we're not going to go any lower. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, onwards from here. Well, thank you so much. Exactly, nice time to wrap up. Well, thank you so much to our lovely panel, everyone. Thank you.